I never believed in ghosts. I never put much stock into haunted houses, cursed objects, or the idea that something could watch you when you weren't looking. That was before the doll. That was before the house in the woods. It started with a letter. A handwritten envelope, old and yellowing, shoved between a pile of bills on my kitchen table. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a misplaced letter meant for someone else, but then I saw my name. To Oliver Strauss, from the estate of Martha Halloway. Martha Halloway. I didn't recognize the name. I had no family left, at least none that I knew of. My parents had passed years ago, and I was an only child. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The letter was brief. Mr. Strauss, you are the sole inheritor of Martha Halloway's estate. The property is located in Ravenswood Hollow and has been left entirely in your name. Please make arrangements to take ownership at your earliest convenience. I sat there, staring at the paper. A house, an entire estate left to me by a woman I had never met. It didn't make sense, but there was an address and a contact number for a law firm handling the estate. So against my better judgment, I called. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Yes, Mr. Strauss, the house is yours. Mrs. Halloway left no direct heirs, and records indicate you are a distant relative, perhaps a great-nephew, though the specifics are unclear. A distant relative. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I had to admit there was something intriguing about it. So, the following weekend, I packed a bag and drove to Ravenswood Hollow. I never should have gone. The house was old, not in the charming, historical way you might expect. No, this was the kind of old that settled into your bones the moment you saw it. The kind that made your stomach twist with unease before you even set foot inside. It stood at the end of a long, cracked driveway, half swallowed by overgrown trees. The windows were covered in dust, the front porch sagging under years of neglect. Yet, somehow, the moment I stepped out of my car, I felt watched. I shook it off and approached the door. The key to the law firm had given me fit perfectly in the rusted lock. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a musty darkness inside. I stepped in, my boots echoing against the wooden floor. Dust floated in the air, catching the dim light filtering through the grime-covered windows. The place smelled of old paper and something else, something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. I exhaled slowly. Well, this is homey. Silence. I told myself the house was just empty. That was all. But as I moved through the main hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here before me, and that they never left. I spent the next hour exploring. The house was huge. 3 floors, a winding staircase, dozens of rooms filled with forgotten furniture and dust-covered trinkets. There were bookshelves lining the walls, their pages yellowed and curling. Then I found the attic. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just passed through. A narrow staircase led up into the darkness, the air colder than the rest of the house. Something about it made my skin prickle. But I went up anyway. The attic was cluttered, filled with old trunks and boxes stacked haphazardly. The smell of aged wood and mildew was thick in the air. And then I saw it, a small wooden chair in the center of the attic, and sitting on it, a doll. It was old, much like the house itself. Its porcelain face was cracked, its once rosy cheeks faded with time. Glass eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, watching. The doll wore a tattered blue dress, its lace trim yellowed with age. Its hair, long and brittle, looked real, too real, like it had once belonged to a person. I swallowed hard. Something about it felt wrong. I should have left it alone. But my fingers moved before I could stop them, brushing against the doll's dress. A sharp jolt ran through my hand, cold and electric, like I had touched something alive. I yanked my hand back. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. It came from the doll, but its mouth never moved. I spun on my heel and left the attic, shutting the door behind me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just an old toy, nothing more. But that night, as I lay in the dusty bedroom beneath the attic, I felt it again. That suffocating weight, like someone was watching me. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear soft, scraping noises above me, like tiny feet pacing, back and forth, back and forth. I kept telling myself it was mice. But in the morning, when I finally worked up the courage to check the attic again, the chair was empty. The doll was gone, and scrawled into the wooden floor where it had been sitting, "I see you." I wanted to leave. That was my first thought when I saw the words, "I see you," scratched into the wooden attic floor. The doll was gone. Something had moved it. Or worse, it had moved on its own. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my thoughts. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe a rat had dragged it somewhere. Maybe the writing had always been there, and I just hadn't noticed. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Something was terribly wrong with this house. I spent the next few hours searching for the doll. I wasn't sure why. Some morbid curiosity. Maybe a need to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I checked every room, every corner, under every piece of furniture. Nothing. The doll had simply vanished. I kept telling myself it was fine, that it didn't matter. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It clung to me like a second skin. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, the house felt unbearable. The silence wasn't just empty, it was waiting. I needed to get out, even just for a little while. Ravenswood Hollow wasn't much of town. A few scattered houses, a diner, a single gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I pulled into the lot outside the diner, stepping inside with a relieved sigh. The place smelled of coffee and fried food, a welcome contrast to the heavy air of the house. A few people sat in booths, murmuring to one another. An old radio played softly behind the counter. I took a seat and ordered coffee. The waitress, a woman in her late 50s, gave me a polite but curious look. "Passing through," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. I inherited the Holloway house. The conversation around us stopped. Every head turned toward me. I stiffened. "What?" The waitress frowned. "You're staying there?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just for a little while." A man at the counter scoffed. "Wouldn't stay there if I were you." "Why?" I asked, my throat dry. The waitress exchanged a glance with him before lowering her voice. "Strange things happen in that house." I swallowed hard. "Like what?" She sighed, setting down her coffee pot. "You ever hear about the Holloway girl?" I shook my head. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Martha Holloway had a daughter, Lilith. She was strange, never spoke much, kept to herself. Folks said she spent most of her time in the attic, playing with that doll of hers." My heart skipped a beat. The doll. The waitress continued. "One night, the Halloways woke up to find Lilith gone. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just vanished. A chill ran down my spine. They searched everywhere, but she was never found. Some folks say she ran away. Others, she trailed off, glancing toward the man at the counter. I swallowed. Others what? Loom in sight. Others say the doll took her. Silence. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head, trying to laugh. Come on. That's just some urban legend, right? The waitress didn't smile. Maybe. Maybe not. But no one's lasted in that house for more than a few nights. And no one's ever stayed after seeing the doll. I drove back to the house in silence. I wanted to believe they were just superstitious, that small-town folk had blown an old tragedy into a ghost story. But I knew better, because the moment I stepped back inside the house, I knew I wasn't alone. The air was heavy, thick with something wrong. Then I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs. I froze. Another thump, louder, closer. I turned toward the staircase, my pulse hammering. Thump, thump, thump. The attic. I reached the top of the stairs, forcing my breath to stay even. The attic door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. I stepped inside, and there, sitting in the middle of the attic, once again the doll. But this time, its head was tilted toward me, like it had been waiting. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me. Darkness swallowed the room. I fumbled for the handle, twisting hard. It wouldn't budge. Then, from the other side of the attic, footsteps. Light, small, barely more than a whisper against the wooden floor. They came closer and closer. I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. A voice, soft, childlike, right next to my ear. Why did you take my house? The door flew open. I stumbled out, falling onto the landing. The attic door slammed shut behind me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent. I should have left. I should have never gone back inside. But I did, and I made the worst mistake of my life. Because that night I spoke to her. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my car, parked just outside the house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The events in the attic kept replaying in my mind, the footsteps, the voice, the feeling of something standing right behind me. I should have left. I should have gotten in my car and driven until that cursed house was nothing but a distant memory. But instead, I went back inside. By the time the first rays of morning light stretched across the sky, my exhaustion won out over my fear. I convinced myself that I had imagined it all. The shadows, the whispers, the doll moving on its own, they were just the product of stress and a lack of sleep. And yet, as I stepped back inside, I felt it immediately. Something was wrong. The house was still. Too still. The kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then I saw it. The doll. It was no longer in the attic. It sat in the hallway, just outside my bedroom, facing my door. My stomach turned. I hadn't moved it. I bent down slowly, hesitating before picking it up. Its glassy eyes stared blankly ahead. Its lips curled into that faint, eerie smile. I forced myself to breathe. How the hell did you get here? I turned it over, looking for any sign of mechanism, a string, anything that could explain why it kept moving. But it was just a doll, or at least it looked like one. I carried it back to the attic. My hands felt clammy against its cold porcelain skin. The whole time, I had this creeping sensation that it was watching me, even though I knew its eyes were painted on. I placed it back where I had originally found it. Before I could turn away, a single thought whispered in the back of my mind. Would it stay there this time? By mid-afternoon, I had almost convinced myself that everything was fine. I forced myself to focus on cleaning. I unpacked a few boxes, made coffee, and ignored the gnawing feeling that I wasn't alone. And for a few hours, the house was quiet. Until I heard it. A small, soft giggle. It came from a hallway. I went still, my blood running cold. Then, the sound of tiny footsteps padding across the wooden floor. I turned toward the stairs, heart hammering. Hello. Silence. I moved toward the sound, stepping lightly. The hallway was empty. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. Then I saw it. The attic door was open again, and the doll was missing. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to leave the house. Instead, I reached for the attic pull cord. The ladder creaked as I climbed up. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The attic was dim, filled with the smell of old wood and dust. My footsteps echoed as I moved forward. And then, the doll was there, sitting in the same spot as before. But something was different. It was facing the wall. My breath hitched. I stepped closer, my pulse thudding in my ears. The air felt heavy, pressing against my skin. Then the whisper came. Don't turn her around. The voice was soft, a child's voice. I whipped around, scanning the attic. Who's there? Nothing. I turned back to the doll. I was shaking. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, to run, but I was too far gone. With a trembling hand, I reached out and turned the doll toward me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a thin, crimson tear slipped from its glassy eye, and the attic plunged into darkness. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the attic floor. A dull pain throbbed at the back of my skull, and for a moment, I was too disoriented to move. Then I remembered. I shot upright, my breath coming in short gasps. The doll was still there, but something had changed. It was closer. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling back. The attic door was still open, thank God. I didn't look back as I ran downstairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the fresh air. But even then, I didn't feel safe, because I could still hear it. That small, distant giggle, coming from the attic. And then, something even worse. Something that made my blood turn to ice. The sound of tiny footsteps coming down the stairs. I barely made it into my car before the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I didn't stop to look, didn't try to rationalize it, didn't even breathe. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement as I tore away from the house. The rearview mirror was the only glimpse I got, the front door still open, the hallway swallowed in shadows. Something was inside that house. Something that wasn't me. I checked into the nearest motel, my hands still shaking as I slid my credit card across the front desk. The clerk barely glanced at me, but I saw the way his expression shifted when I told him the address of my house. He hesitated. You just move in? He asked. I nodded, gripping the pen tighter than I needed to as I signed the check-in form. The clerk's eyes flicked to me, then back down. You should be careful staying out there alone. I swallowed. What? He shrugged, forcing a polite smile. Locals say that place has history. Strange things. I leaned forward. Like what? The hesitation again. Then a simple answer. People leave. But the house doesn't let them go. A chill ran through me. Good night, he said, handing me my key before I could press further. The motel room was cold, despite the heater running. I triple-checked the door lock, then sat down on the bed, rubbing my temples. I was exhausted. I wanted to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. That soft, childlike giggle. The patter of small feet on wooden floors. I shook my head, gripping the sides of my skull. It's in my head. It's not real. But I knew it was. And worse, I had left the doll behind. By morning, I had convinced myself I wasn't going back. I would sell the house. Leave everything in it. Burn it down if I had to. I didn't care. I just wanted to be far away. But when I reached into my bag for my phone, my stomach dropped. Because sitting there, nestled among my belongings, was the doll. My breath hitched. My vision blurred with sheer disbelief and horror. No, no, I left it in the attic. I left it. I swallowed, heart hammering. My hands shook as I reached for it. The porcelain was ice cold against my fingertips. It was different. There were smudges on its cheeks, like someone had touched its face with dirty hands. My hands, or someone else's? I dropped it while rising in my throat. This was wrong. So wrong. I grabbed my car keys. I had to get rid of it. The nearest body of water was a few miles away, a murky, slow-moving river that wound through the woods. I didn't care how deep it was. I just needed the doll gone. The drive was a blur. I barely registered the road signs, my pulse thundering in my ears. When I finally reached the riverbank, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the doll, my fingers curling around its tiny arms, and hurled it into the water. The splash was small. The current carried it away, the porcelain face sinking beneath the surface. It was gone. I exhaled sharply, pressing my hands against my knees. It was over. I turned back toward my car, relief washing over me in waves. And then a giggle. Behind me. I froze. Turned back. The river was still. No doll. No ripples. But something was standing on the opposite bank. A small shape. A child. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of its small frame, standing among the trees. Then it moved. It took a single step forward, head tilting. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The figure took another step, its bare feet making no sound against the wet ground. And then I saw its eyes. Black. Hollow. Empty. The giggle came again, but the child's mouth never moved. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't go back to the motel. Didn't go back to the house. I drove for hours, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I had no destination. I just had to be away. By the time I stopped, the sky was dark. A rest stop somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I killed the engine, exhaling shakily. I was safe. I had to be. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Silence. For the first time in days, silence. Until a small weight pressed against my chest. My eyes snapped open. And there, sitting in the passenger seat, was the doll. Closer than before. Its glass eyes were wrong. Dark. Too dark. Like there was something behind them, staring back at me. A single tear slid from its eye, red like blood. Then it spoke. You shouldn't have left me. I couldn't breathe. The doll sat there, still as death, its porcelain face gleaming faintly in the dim light. You shouldn't have left me. The voice was neither childlike nor robotic. It was something in between. Something unnatural. My entire body locked up. I felt like I had been paralyzed, my hands gripping the wheel, unable to move. Then its head tilted. I let out a strangled gasp and scrambled backward, my hand reaching for the door handle. I yanked it open and fell out onto the pavement. The night air was thick and humid, but all I felt was cold. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and turned back toward the car. The passenger seat was empty. The doll was gone. I didn't go back. I left the car running, grabbed my bag, and ran toward the highway. There was no one around. The rest stop was nearly abandoned, just a single flickering light illuminating the lot. I didn't care. I needed distance, needed to be far away from that thing. I kept walking, kept moving, until I saw headlights approaching from down the road. A truck. I ran into the street, waving my arms. The truck screeched to a halt, the driver rolling down the window. "Jesus, you okay?" A man in his 50s, gray beard, tired eyes. "Safe." I swallowed hard. "Please, just get me away from here." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Get in." The truck smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. I barely registered it. I just needed to be gone. We drove for miles, the highway stretching out endlessly in the dark. The driver, Tom, didn't ask many questions, just glanced at me every so often. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he muttered. I forced out a hollow laugh. He didn't push. I was grateful for that. It wasn't until we stopped at another gas station that it happened. Tom went inside to grab some food. I stayed in the truck, staring out at the empty road, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. Then I saw it. A shape, standing under the streetlight. Small, motionless, watching. No, it couldn't be. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's in your head. You're seeing things. I opened them again. The shape was closer. My breath hitched. I reached for the door handle, and then a tap. On the window. Slow. Rhythmic. I turned, my stomach dropping into ice. The doll was sitting in the passenger seat, its tiny porcelain hand pressed against the glass. Its lips curved into a smile. And its eyes, oh God, its eyes. They were no longer glass. They were alive. I don't remember screaming. Don't remember bursting out of the truck, my legs moving before my brain could catch up. All I remember is running. Tom shouted behind me, confused, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran past the gas station, past the pumps, into the dark stretch of road beyond. The night swallowed me, but I wasn't alone. I could hear it, the patter of tiny footsteps, running behind me. Faster, faster, giggling, a voice whispering in my ear, "You can't run forever." I tripped, fell hard onto the asphalt. My hands scraped against the rough surface, pain lancing through my knees. And then silence. I looked up. The road was empty. No doll, no sound, just darkness. Waiting, watching. Tom found me minutes later, breathing hard, his flashlight beam cutting through the night. What the hell happened? I couldn't answer, couldn't form words. He helped me up, his grip firm. "Come on," he muttered. "We're getting you somewhere safe." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But deep down I knew there was nowhere safe. Not anymore. I spent the next few weeks in a small town, renting a room in a dingy motel. I didn't sleep much. Didn't eat much either. I just waited for the giggles, the footsteps, the tap at the window. But they never came. Not yet. I started convincing myself that maybe it was over. Maybe I had escaped. Maybe the doll had finally let me go. Until one night, I woke up. The room was silent. Still. But something felt wrong. I turned my head slowly. And there, sitting in the chair by the window, was the doll. Its glassy eyes stared into mine. And then it smiled. "I found you."